The rise of Kemi. In a village nestled between fertile lands and a quiet river, there lived a girl named Kemi. The village was small, and people lived in harmony with nature, growing their crops, raising cattle, and trading at the marketplace. Kemi's father, a humble farmer, toiled under the harsh sun every day, cultivating crops and working the land to provide for his family. Despite his hard work, the farm was often too small to sustain all their needs. Kemi's mother, a skilled trader, sold goods at the marketplace, making just enough to keep food on the table. The family lived simply, but they were content. Kemi, on the other hand, had dreams that extended beyond the small world of her village. She was beautiful, bright, and kind-hearted, with a warm smile that could light up any room. As a young girl, she excelled in school, always at the top of her class. Her teachers admired her intelligence, and the villagers spoke of her future potential. She would do great things one day, they would say. Kemi's parents were proud of their daughter, who made them proud in so many ways. Every evening, Kemi would help her mother with the trading, sitting by her side at the market, learning how to negotiate and speak with the other villagers. But Kemi felt a constant yearning for something more. She dreamed of a life where she didn't have to worry about the next meal or how to make ends meet. She dreamed of luxury, of beautiful clothes, of fine jewelry. She dreamed of a life where she could make choices that weren't limited by the poverty surrounding her. The small village that had nurtured her also held her back. Every time she saw travelers pass through the village, her heart would race with the thought of a world beyond the horizon. One fateful day, Kemi crossed paths with a stranger who would change the course of her life forever. His name was Olumide. He was a tall, mysterious man, with sharp features and an air of confidence that seemed to radiate from him. He was unlike anyone Kemi had met before. Olumide was from a distant land and spoke of opportunities in the cities, where people lived in luxury and wealth. He talked about powerful men who could provide all a woman could ever desire in exchange for a simple agreement. Kemi didn't fully understand his words, but the promise of a different life ignited a fire within her. Olumide spoke of how women like her could earn fortunes, live comfortably, and escape the hardships they faced in their villages. All they had to do was make a choice. The temptation. As time went by, Kemi found herself torn between her duties at home and the pull of something greater. She had always been close to her friend, Funk, who was full of life and had a carefree attitude that Kemi admired. Funk had something that Kemi didn't: wealth. Funk wore beautifully crafted clothes, adorned herself with jewelry that gleamed in the sun, and never seemed to worry about where her next meal would come from. Kemi began to spend more time with Funk, drawn by the idea that perhaps her friend held the secret to a better life. One evening, as they sat together by the river, Funk shared her secrets with Kemi. "You see," Funk said, her eyes gleaming, "there are men who will pay handsomely for what we have to offer. They are powerful, wealthy, and they want nothing more than to have a child." Kemi looked at her in disbelief. "What do you mean?" she asked. Funk smiled, her tone secretive. "They pay to have children, but it's not as it seems. We take care of the baby until they are born, then sell them to the highest bidder. The money they give us is more than enough to live comfortably. It's a simple arrangement, and we never have to worry again." Kemi was shocked. "But, Funk, what if something goes wrong? What if something happens to the child?" Funk just laughed. "Don't worry. It's simple, Kemi. And besides, the money you get is worth it. You see." Kemi felt conflicted. On the one hand, she could not ignore the temptation of such wealth. On the other hand, something felt wrong. She had always been raised to believe that family and love were the most important things in life. But Funk's words kept echoing in her mind. The opportunity to leave behind the struggles of her village, to live a life of comfort and luxury, was within her grasp. After much deliberation, Kemi made the fateful decision. She would take the money. She would do what was necessary to escape the life she had known. It wasn't easy, but the promise of wealth pushed her forward. She visited the man who had spoken to her, all he might, and agreed to follow his advice. In return, she would be given the life she had always dreamed of. She would bear children, and those children would be sold. Her first pregnancy was a result of her new agreement. Kemi carried the child, knowing that once it was born, it would be taken from her. She no longer felt the joy or excitement that other mothers felt during pregnancy. Instead, she counted the days, eager for the day she could give up the child and receive her payment. The price of wealth. The day came when Kemi gave birth to a healthy baby boy. But instead of feeling the overwhelming love that most mothers feel for their newborns, Kemi felt a strange emptiness. She held her child, but all she could think about was the money waiting for her. The wealthy buyer arrived, pleased with the child, and Kemi handed the baby over to him without hesitation. She received her payment and a large sum of money, along with fine jewelry and beautiful clothes. At first, Kemi felt a rush of excitement. She could finally live the life she had always dreamed of. She bought a beautiful house in the city, far away from the small village she had known. She filled her home with fine furniture, beautiful fabrics, and everything she had ever wanted. Kemi felt powerful and rich, but over time, the excitement began to fade. She would go to the marketplace, adorned in her fine clothes and sparkling jewelry, but she felt empty inside. The other women would look at her with envy, whispering to one another about her wealth. But Kemi knew that beneath her riches lay a deep sense of loss. The child she had sold, the one she had carried for months, was gone. And in exchange, she had gained something that didn't feel like true happiness. As the months passed, Kemi repeated the cycle. She became pregnant again and again, each time selling the child shortly after birth. Each sale made her wealthier, but it also made her more detached from the world around her. She no longer felt the bond of motherhood. All she could think about was the next payment, the next transaction. Her family began to notice the change in her. They saw her from afar, living in luxury, but they no longer recognized the kind, loving daughter they had known. Her mother, especially, grew concerned. "Kemi, my daughter, what has happened to you?" she asked one day, her voice filled with worry. Kemi smiled weakly, trying to reassure her mother. "I'm fine, mother. I have everything I ever wanted now." But deep down, Kemi knew that she had lost something far more valuable than all the wealth in the world, her soul. The endless cycle. Kemi's wealth continued to grow as she bore more children and sold them to the highest bidder. She lived in a grand house, surrounded by riches, but she felt more alone than ever. Her family began to pull away from her, unable to understand the choices she had made. She would visit her village from time to time, but she could no longer relate to the people she had once known. They spoke of simple things, family, farming, and village life, while Kemi was consumed by her wealth and luxury. But the emptiness within her only deepened. Every time she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a stranger. She had lost the ability to connect with others, and the wealth she had gained only served to isolate her further. Still, she continued with her actions, believing that the more money she made, the more satisfied she would become. One day, while walking through the marketplace, Kemi met a man named Tond. He was kind, generous, and handsome. They spent more time together, and before long, Tond confessed his love for her. Kemi was surprised, but she felt something stir within her that she hadn't felt in years. Tond seemed different. He wasn't interested in her wealth or status. He loved her for who she was, not for what she could provide. Tond proposed, and Kemi, for the first time in a long while, felt hopeful. Perhaps, she thought, this was the love she had been searching for. Maybe marriage would bring her the happiness that money never could. She accepted his proposal, and the two of them were married in a beautiful ceremony. But as the months passed, Kemi realized that she was unable to bear children. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't conceive. Ton's family began to pressure her. They wanted grandchildren, and the pressure became too much for Kemi to bear. She was ashamed of her inability to fulfill her duties as a wife. Ton, too, grew frustrated, and eventually, his family began to criticize her. The breaking point. As time passed, Kemi thought she had found the one thing she had longed for, a true connection, a love that was real, and not based on wealth or transactions. Ton was a man who saw her, not just the riches she had accumulated or the reputation she had built. He admired her kindness, her intelligence, and her beauty, all the qualities that had once made her the pride of the village. For the first time in years, Kemi began to feel hopeful again. The luxurious life she had created felt empty, and here, with Ton, she believed she could build something more meaningful. The wedding ceremony was an event to remember. The entire village gathered to celebrate the union of Kemi and Ton, as they were one of the most admired couples. Kemi wore a gown made of fine fabrics that shimmered in the sunlight, and Ton, handsome and dignified, looked at her with affection in his eyes. For a brief moment, Kemi allowed herself to believe that love could fix everything. She felt a glimmer of happiness that she had not felt in years, the joy of knowing someone cared for her beyond the wealth she had accumulated. However, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Kemi began to feel an unease that she couldn't shake. Her hopes for a future with Ton grew clouded with frustration and a growing sense of failure. Despite all their efforts, she couldn't conceive. At first, she tried to ignore the pressure, assuring herself that it was only a matter of time. But as months passed without any sign of pregnancy, the pressure from Ton's family began to grow unbearable. Ton's mother, a woman with a fierce love for her son and an even fiercer desire for grandchildren, became the first to express her disappointment. She would often make casual comments in passing. "Ton, my dear, we've been married for so long now, don't you think it's time for grandchildren?" she would say, as if it were a simple request. Ton would smile and nod, but Kemi could see the worry in his eyes. He, too, wanted children, but he had never placed the same kind of pressure on Kemi as his mother did. But then, things took a darker turn. Kemi's mother-in-law became more insistent, and the comments turned into reprimands. One evening, as Kemi and Ton sat down for dinner, his mother entered the room without knocking, her face red with anger. "What's wrong with you, Kemi? Why can't you give us a child? Ton is a good man, and he deserves a family. We deserve grandchildren." Her voice was filled with frustration, and her gaze was sharp as she stared at Kemi. Kemi felt herself shrinking under the weight of her mother-in-law's words. She had never imagined that love could come with such expectations, such demands. She had come to the marriage hoping that love would be enough, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Ton, sensing the tension, stood up. "Mother, that's enough," he said, trying to intervene. "Please, don't pressure Kemi like this." But his mother wasn't done. "Ton, your wife is barren. She cannot give you what you need. She has failed you, and now you must consider your future. How long will you remain in this hopeless marriage?" The words stung Kemi like 1,000 needles. She looked at Ton, but he avoided her gaze, his face a mixture of guilt and frustration. Kemi's heart sank. She had always known the price of her choices, but hearing these words from Ton's own mother felt like the final blow. She had failed him. She had failed herself. She had failed her dreams of a family. For so long, she had sold her children for money, but now she could not even provide Ton with what he desired most, a child. She felt as though she had sacrificed everything, only to end up with nothing. The following days were filled with an eerie silence between Kemi and Ton. He no longer looked at her with the same warmth in his eyes. He withdrew, unable to cope with his mother's constant pressure. Kemi, too, retreated into herself, feeling more alone than ever. She had hoped that love could redeem her, that it could heal the wounds created by her past actions. But now she realized that nothing could undo the choices she had made. One evening, after another heated discussion with his mother, Ton approached Kemi. "I'm sorry, Kemi, but I can't do this anymore. My family is pressuring me. I cannot be married to someone who cannot give me children." Kemi's heart shattered as he spoke those words, but she didn't respond. What could she say? The man she loved, the man who had promised her happiness, had left her in the wake of her past mistakes. She was left alone in their home, staring at the walls that had once felt like the beginning of a new life. Ton left that night. The next morning, Kemi was alone. The grand house she had built, the wealth she had accumulated, all of it seemed meaningless now. Ton's absence was a reminder that love and money could not buy happiness. Kemi's heart was heavy with regret, but it was too late to turn back the clock. The reckoning. Kemi's world began to unravel. The village that had once admired her, that had looked upon her with awe because of her beauty and wealth, now turned their backs on her. The news of her failed marriage spread like wildfire. People began to gossip about her past, the babies she had sold, the wealth she had earned in such a terrible way. She had built her riches on the backs of her own flesh and blood, and now she had nothing to show for it except a broken marriage and the scorn of those who had once been her admirers. The buyers of her children returned. They were angry, demanding their money back or compensation for the children she had sold. The villagers, fueled by their anger and resentment, joined in, accusing Kemi of betrayal, of committing a crime against motherhood. The once admiring eyes of the villagers turned to looks of contempt. Kemi, now stripped of her wealth and dignity, was forced to face the reality of her actions. Her family had disowned her, and her former friends avoided her. The life she had built was gone, and she was left with nothing but her guilt and the knowledge that she had destroyed her own future for the sake of greed. In a desperate attempt to atone for her sins, Kemi left her village and traveled to the place where she had made her first deal. She sought out the buyers, hoping to find a way to reclaim the children she had sold. But they had moved on. The children she had abandoned were now part of their new families, and they would not be returned. Kemi pleaded with them, offering them all the gold she had left, but they turned her away. Her pleas fell on deaf ears, and she realized the enormity of her mistake. She had destroyed not just her life, but the lives of those she had brought into the world and discarded for the sake of money. She had nothing left. Her soul felt hollow. She returned to the village, hoping for redemption, but the villagers had no sympathy. They saw her as a symbol of greed and corruption. Her reputation was ruined, and no one would look at her the same way again. Kemi stood before them, ashamed and broken, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had lost everything. Redemption or ruin? Kemi's fall from grace was swift and brutal. She returned to the village with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of regret. Her parents, who had once been so proud of her, could not look her in the eye. They knew what she had done, and the shame of it weighed heavily on them. Her mother, heartbroken by the truth, passed away not long after hearing of Kemi's actions. The loss of her mother was the final blow to Kemi's spirit. She realized that no amount of wealth or luxury could replace the love and warmth of family. Kemi tried to make amends. She gave away all her remaining wealth, offering it to the villagers, hoping to buy back their forgiveness. But they rejected her offerings. They did not want the money she had earned through such terrible means. They could see the darkness in her soul, the toll that her actions had taken on her. In a final act of repentance, Kemi sold everything she owned, including the grand house she had once been so proud of. She gave the money to the poor, hoping to cleanse herself of the sins that had plagued her for so long. But the villagers would not accept her redemption. They saw her as a warning, a lesson in what greed could do to a person. They whispered about her behind her back, shaking their heads at her foolishness. Kemi left the village, alone and penniless, and made her way to a small cottage at the edge of the village, far from the life of luxury she had once known. She spent her days in solitude, reflecting on the choices she had made. She had lived her life for money, and now she was left with nothing but sorrow. The words she had once craved now seemed like a distant memory, a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Kemi's story became a cautionary tale for the village. Parents told their children to never make the same mistake that Kemi had. "Remember Kemi," they would say. "She had everything, but she lost it all because she could not see what truly mattered." And as Kemi sat alone in her small cottage, she realized too late that the most valuable things in life, love, family, and kindness, were the things she had traded away for gold and jewels. Her story became one of regret, a reminder that no amount of wealth could ever replace the things that truly made life worth living. And as the years passed, the memory of Kemi's fall from grace lived on, a warning for generations to come.